Correspondent Reza Sayeh. Reza, how much information are you getting with that internet blockage?
Not much. I've covered Iran for more than a decade. I've seen breakouts of anti-government protests that led authorities to restrict internet service, but I've never seen an information blackout like I've seen here for the past 3 days. And with the internet restricted, it's nearly impossible to collect and confirm information, nearly impossible to report if the protests are still going on, and if so, on what scale and what degree. At this hour, it's a little after 8:30 p.m. local time. Where I am in central Tehran, things appear to be quiet. As I did last night, I took a brief drive around a major square nearby. I saw heavy security presence. Again, security forces in pairs wearing riot gear, manning almost every street corner. Based on conversations by phone with people outside of Tehran, my impression is the most intense protest took place outside the capital. Someone in Isfahan, for example, telling me today that he saw multiple gas stations and buildings burn. I also talked to a doctor at a Tehran hospital who asked not to be named. He said some gunshot victims had been brought in for treatment from outside of Tehran.
And how is it being reported on state media?
State media making an extra effort to stress that people have the right to protest. At the same time, they're describing the protesters as thugs pushed by Iran's enemies, an apparent effort to justify the crackdown. The newest information from state media is that 3 security personnel have been killed. They're reporting 2 protesters killed in the past 3 days. They also report protests in 100 cities, more than 100 banks and businesses vandalized, and 1,000 people arrested, according to state media.
Any reaction that you've heard of yet to Amnesty International's breakdown of those killed according to what they have been able to verify?
No reaction on those claims today. We'll see if that changes tomorrow. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif did slam U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's statement of support for the protesters, calling it a shameful lie. Zarif also critical of Washington's European allies who have condemned the protests. Zarif saying those European allies failed to stand up against Washington's economic terrorism, and now they're supporting unrest here in Iran.
Reza Sayeh reporting live from the capital, Tehran. Many thanks for that update.
Very little information reaches the outside world from Iran. Authorities have shut down the internet. Whether there are still protests there and where they may be taking place is difficult to verify. Videos from Monday evening show angry demonstrators. Some are demanding that the government step down. The protests were sparked by a drastic increase in the price of gasoline. U.S. sanctions and mismanagement are the main causes of Iran's economic crisis.
I have 3 jobs to support myself. Of course, people are upset, and now they've found a reason to show their dissatisfaction. Everyone does it in their own way.
Pictures of men who have been arrested are shown on state television. They're accused of initiating the protests at the behest of other countries. One hardline newspaper reports they could face the death penalty. More than 1,000 people are believed to have been arrested in the wake of the protests. The UN has expressed concern over the security service's heavy-handed response.
Numbers killed are certainly in the dozens, in at least 2 figures, some reports even higher. So it would be very useful to have a better, clearer picture, but it's clearly very significant.
Meanwhile, the Iranian leadership is adhering to a hard line. Internet restrictions are still in effect in Iran.
Let's get more now by bringing in Luke Walpott. He's a correspondent in Tehran following the story for us. Good day to you, Luke. Do we have any confirmation about this high death toll? And what do we know about the number of people injured?
It's very difficult for us here in Tehran to bring any confirmation to these figures because, as you said, the internet is down. It's very difficult also to get information throughout the cities in the country. What we know is that telephone lines still working, and we have several reports from people in province cities that the grip of the security was very, very tough. And it seems that what Amnesty says, that it was also fired, that the police was firing with live live ammunition on demonstrators, is very likely that the death toll is much higher than the official figure, and probably higher than 100 people killed. And we know from families that they are very angry that bodies were not returned to their families, bodies of dead people. They were buried immediately the same day on Saturday or Sunday, which might be an indication that something is deeply wrong with the figures that the authorities are giving.
Luke, what's behind these protests? It was they were sparked by the hike in fuel prices. Is that still driving them, or is it something else?
It's an overall anger, I think, with the things politically, how they are going here in Iran. It is sparked basically by the price rise in gasoline, that's sure, because many people feel they are entitled to have a very, very cheap gasoline price, given the fact that salaries are so low in Iran, and economical hardship, especially since the latest round of new sanctions from US in the last year. Economical situation is so bad for them that they feel that fuel should be giving, gasoline should be giving them for free, actually. But it's as I said, economy is going down every week a bit more. Since the sanctions last year that have been imposed by the US, we have no more or almost no more oil export here in Iran, and the oil exports count for roughly 90% of the state revenue. This means inflation is very high. The devaluation of the Iranian rial is extremely. It lost more than half of its value within 10 months. And this means that the prices are rising. Prices for staple, for food, for rice, for milk. And people simply cannot cope with that situation because, of course, salaries are not rising in the same speed. And that is basically the anger. And people put the blame for this situation not as much as in the past to foreign countries like US, which imposed the sanctions, but very much to the regime, because they think the regime should find a solution.
Okay, what's your impression? Does that mean that these protests will continue, might even get larger?
No, actually, I think it was a significant, but a small part of the population that went to the streets. The huge middle class, which is several millions of Iranian citizens, they are very cautious. We spoke to people yesterday here in Tehran. They don't feel that it's the appropriate time to go on the street because they fear that the crackdown of the security apparatus might be even worse. So I don't think that the situation is going out of control, because what the Supreme Leader said, it's a security matter and not a social protest, means that they are definitely willing to crack down on this situation.
Luke, thanks so very much for that from Tehran this morning.
What do we know about the Iran protests? With the internet there effectively shut down, it's been difficult to get a clear picture. DW has verified videos and information and compiled a summary of the events that have taken place there over the last week. Here's what you need to know about the unrest. Nationwide protests first erupted last Friday, after authorities rolled out a sudden patrol rationing scheme and slashed subsidies. This sent fuel prices soaring by at least 50%. Though Iran promises to redistribute the subsidy revenue to poorer people, it's nonetheless getting harder for ordinary Iranians to make ends meet. The US decision in 2018 to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, reimpose sanctions, and choke off the last remaining sources of Tehran's oil revenue has crippled the Iranian economy. While the protests were triggered by Iran's worsening economic situation, people are also angry about corruption, poor living standards, and social inequality, and they've begun calling for a radical overhaul of the political system. Here we see demonstrators chanting, "Bless Reza Shah's soul," referring to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah or king of Iran, known for his efforts to modernize Iran before its 1979 Islamic Revolution. The protests have spread to cities and towns across the country. Posters and buildings associated with Iran's supreme leader have been burned. theological college was set on fire, as were multiple police stations and cars in various cities. Banks and gas stations have also been set alight. Amnesty International says that so far, at least 106 people have been killed.
We believe that the real number may be much higher, given that there is now a total or a near total block on access to the internet, and many are not able to communicate information about the loss of their loved ones. We have also obtained eyewitness accounts and corroborated video footage that came from inside Iran, which shows security forces are using live ammunition and tear gas and water cannons to violently disperse protesters. So all in all, a very severe and bloody crackdown on people who are coming to the streets or taking into the streets to express their political and economic grievances.
This has been the worst unrest in Iran since late 2017. In recent days, both Iran's President Hassan Rouhani and a judiciary spokesman have claimed that calm has been restored in the country. Rouhani blames the protests on the country's, quote, foreign enemies.
Last Friday, at least 106 protesters have been killed in 21 cities across the country. We believe that the real number may be much higher, given that there is now a total or a near total block on access to the internet.
We're deeply concerned by reported violations of international norms and standards on the use of force, including the firing of live ammunition against demonstrators in Iran during the protests that began on Friday and have continued into this week.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran.
The protests are triggered by economic grievances. However, according to the footage that we have seen from different cities across the country, many people are also chanting anti-establishment slogans. They are calling for a radical overhaul of the political system.